Hello, everyone. I'll be sharing with you this time the upcoming Sunday school lesson for January the 7th, the first Sunday in the year 2024. It is called Faith and Righteousness, and it comes from Hebrews chapter 11. If you have your book before you, you will see that quite a few verses are chosen for this lesson. However, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. I'm looking at more of the verses than what is chosen for your lesson. The book of Hebrews is one of my favorite Bible books. The name implies it was written to Hebrew or Jewish believers in Jesus Christ. It includes many references to Old Testament passages. Its focus is Jesus Christ, the Son of God. According to this unknown author, the Son is superior to angels. Yet while superior, the man Jesus was made lower than angels for a time in chapter 2. The Son is also our apostle and high priest, chapters 3 to 5 and 7 to 9. Hebrews was written during a time of persecution under Emperor Nero. There is strong warning against falling away from the faith in Jesus Christ, found in chapters 6 and 10. Another term found in Hebrews is new covenant. Christ is the mediator of this new covenant, chapter 9, verse 15, and makes this new covenant valid with his shed blood. As such, Jesus Christ is the perfect sacrifice, chapter 10. Quoting, For by one offering he has perfected forever those who are sanctified, chapter 10, verse 14. The writer wants his audience, and us by extension, to realize that salvation is not earned, it is a gift of grace found in faith. Which brings us to chapter 11. Hebrews 11 is one of the most recognized and loved chapters in the Bible. It is often called the Hall of Faith to differentiate it from man-made glory, which we call a Hall of Fame. For your personal study, I would encourage you to read all of chapter 11. You will note that your Sunday school lesson leaves out certain parts. The long history of Jewish men and women who lived a life of faith, persevering through difficult times, making the right or righteous decisions that changed the destiny of individuals and families and even the nation of Israel. Let's begin with verse 1. The writer says that faith is believing in what is not seen. Believing what is not currently known, but what is hoped for. I often say that faith cannot always be defined by human language. It is not logic. It is not intelligence. It cannot always be predicted. Faith may not be understood by others. While faith and science are not necessarily at odds with each other, faith is bigger, much bigger, and greater than science and human knowledge. It is appropriate that the Hebrew writer begins with creation in verse 3. Science can tell us much about planet Earth and our solar system, but it cannot tell us everything. How was the universe created? It was created by the spoken word of God. God spoke and created it into being. Creation was not an accident. Creation was planned by God. Creation is good, and God created man and woman to be Earth's caretakers. As we think about human history, there have been many bad actors. There always has been, and there are even today some very horrible people. Horrible people are not confined to one country. Truly, dangerous and horrible conditions abound everywhere. And in the midst of this, people of great faith emerged. People who changed the destiny of the Hebrew people, thus Hebrews. The author begins with Abel. Abel was approved by God as a righteous man because of his offering, his sacrifice. It was sincere, genuine from the heart. He represented faith even though his jealous brother murdered him. Next is Enoch. Enoch, who walked with God. Genesis tells us that God took him away as his reward, meaning he did not suffer death on this earth. Next is Noah. Noah, who had faith that God would save his family, even though the world would be destroyed by a universal flood. Noah was prophetic, willing to condemn the world as the world was ridiculing him. And next is Abraham. Abraham's story takes up more space in chapter 11 than any others because it changed the narrative of Israel's history, believing God by faith rather than through works or law. Check out Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, where Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Abraham's story included his wife Sarah and the birth of Isaac, truly a faith miracle. Then by faith, Abraham would later offer up Isaac as a sacrifice, but God sent instead a ram to be offered, a substitutionary sacrifice. Isaac foreshadowed Jesus of Nazareth and the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus on the cross, but also the resurrection from the dead in verse 19. Next are Jacob and Joseph. These men truly lived lives of faith, particularly Joseph. His story captures more ink than any other in the book of Genesis. The Hebrew writer makes the faith connection between Joseph and Moses, where Joseph saved the people through Egypt and Moses delivered God's people from Egypt. How was Moses a man of faith? In many ways, through the actions of his mother, giving up him as a baby to Pharaoh's daughter, through challenging Pharaoh 80 years later, demanding that Pharaoh release or set free all of the Hebrews, and then leading them out of Egypt through the wilderness for 40 years, a mission that Joshua would complete. In this chronicle of faithful men and women are some who were not originally Hebrews, which is quite interesting. Abram and Sarai came from Babylon, Ur of the Chaldees. Rahab was a Canaanite living in Jericho. While not named, the author refers to the widow of Zarephath, again, not a Hebrew, whose son was raised from the dead. And also not mentioned by name are Daniel and his 3 Jewish Hebrew friends who, while in captivity in Babylon and then later in Persia, saw God rescue them from the lions and the fire, bringing faith to their pagan captors. Next are judges and military leaders and prophets and kings. Some are well known and some are not. Perhaps you know that Gideon defeated the Midianites with only 300 men. But how about military leader Barak, some might pronounce it Barak, who led Israel to victory because of the prophetess and judge Deborah? One of the important lessons about these men and women of faith is that they were not perfect even in their faith. For example, Gideon tested God. Barak would not go into battle without Deborah. Samson would defile himself by disobeying his Nazirite vows. David would commit adultery and be party to murder. Faith is not always easily recognizable, but faith is always essential. The biblical story found in the Old and New Testaments is based upon and built upon faith. Without faith, there is no Israel. Without faith, there is no church. Without faith, there is no salvation for any of us. In closing, I would like to make reference to page 45 of the Learner's Guide. It's a wonderful story. It's the story of Margaret Hayes, medical missionary to the Congo in Africa. Margaret was timid about answering the call, God's call, much like Moses, who had a speech difficulty as well. But Mark 4:40 challenged her when Jesus was speaking to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? As she followed God's call upon her life, she experienced many hardships. Congo was primitive, a very primitive tribal country. And when war broke out, some of her friends suffered and even died. A close American missionary friend named Mary Baker, 5 other missionaries, 5 children, and 4 nuns were massacred. Margaret was also believed to be dead, but God provided for her rescue. Living a life of faith does not mean life will be easy. What does God require of you? Faith, for sure, and faith leads to obedience. As we sing this great hymn, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. May that be your motto this week. Be a person of faith and find righteousness in your faith relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Have a wonderful week. God bless.